Okay, check, check. One, two. Perfect. All right. Thank you for everybody for tuning in today. Again, my name is Raatib Anderson. I am going to be discussing the topic of the Canadian identity. This is a very controversial topic that I was, I guess, at the forefront of. And with respect to the Canadian identity, multiculturalism, and how that affects Canada. So, I hope everybody watched my first video that I just put up. That was really about just my experience running in the last 44th election as a MP. And again, for those of you who don't know, my name is Raatib Anderson, based out in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So let's get into this right here. So, what does it mean to be Canadian? What is it at its core? How do we define Canadianness? There's a lovely CBC article out right now, and it's titled exactly that. What does it mean to be Canadian? As of course, I'm sure many of you could already guess, Canada throughout the globe is seen as a glowy, a warm at heart, cold in weather, kind place, known for its natural beauty, its forests, lakes, rivers, mountains, a sort of better, almost utopian version of the United States, our counterparts down to the south. We have amazing public schools, we have wonderful healthcare, our federal institutions are known across the globe for being fair and just, as we are all often described as the fundamental rights and freedoms advocate. We defend not only freedom for ourselves, but freedoms for others. We ensure, or at least we always go forth in our steadfastness towards justice and democracy. Another thing that really people would describe Canada as is being interconnected throughout the globe. Of course, that is largely due to our not only the idea of multiculturalism, but immigrants from all over the globe, refugees, settlers alike, who've come to Canada and called this country their home, myself included. We have a multifaceted immigrant society, many different voices, and multiple forms of cultural expression. And this is how Canada again is viewed throughout the globe. But if you have to really think about it, the idea of multiculturalism, this feeling that's invoked many people when you say that word, would you not describe, or perhaps would you describe it as something that is innate to Canada, as something that is, or an organic process by default? That's the true question. Is multiculturalism just a organic, free-flowing idea that brings all Canadian backgrounds together? A natural byproduct of simply the Canadian state's existence? And that's the question for today. I think that article from CBC really does articulate various points from various peoples quite well, from all backgrounds of life, PhD professors, politicians, your average Joe, and throughout several countries, Europe, Asia, Africa, it goes over what the perceived notion of Canadianness is. But I personally, and I'm sure many other people, would feel something different. And this video is really going to highlight how multiculturalism by design, again, is divisive and it is destructive, and that there is a pervasive ideal of actually colonialism that is the founding base for our multicultural idea. So, by definition, multiculturalism is that of several distinct cultural or ethnic groups within a single society. So, multiculturalism, by definition, is several distinct cultural or ethnic groups within a society, all coexisting. No problem with that. I think that's in a globalized world, in a postmodern society, that is pretty much the case for most of the West and much of Asia. There's multiculturalism throughout everywhere, but how this is shaped and formed and dealt with, it it varies between the host country. Now, bringing it back to myself, I remember when I brought this point up, it was met extremely with a lot of hesitancy. A lot of people would fight me on this case of multiculturalism and it being inherently, what's the word? I don't want to say bad, but it's disingenuous, inherently disingenuous. A lot of people, whether it was on social media, whether they called me up themselves, I know a lot of you would talk to me saying, hey, you know what? Canada's this, Canada's that. You're obviously an immigrant. Why don't you enjoy the idea of Canada, of multiculturalism? Don't you find your identity in being ex-Canadian, or don't you find that the Canadian identity is one of a variety of cultures, a variety of peoples, and every certain person has their place within our society? Which I think if you, no one could necessarily argue against that. Of course, as a settler country, there's going to be people from all walks of life, in all countries, various ethnicities and language groups. That isn't the issue. My issue with multiculturalism is that it is disingenuous towards Canadian citizens. It isn't the rose petaled, feel good idea, policy, legislator that we all like it to believe. Multiculturalism, in fact, I would say, is a detriment to the Canadian identity. And let's get into that. So we look here, and again, I'd love to have people call in, but not just, yeah, I'm going to be doing a few more videos first, and then I'll have perhaps a lot of forums and debates, because I'm sure my people, I wouldn't really say they're that counter thought or that radical, my ideas, or the ideas of any political party, such as the People's Party of Canada, that would share the same viewpoints. I believe we are somewhat stuck in a rut from what we've been taught straight into school, studying sociology, and you learn, in fact, that, there's enclaves of people and different language groups and different cultures, and there's ex-Canadians, Y-Canadians, Z-Canadians. But then when you do all of this and you fracture everybody, what does it mean to be Canadian? So that's my gripe with the situation. Fracturing people doesn't truly bring a Canadian state, not a cohesive and unified one. Because the plights of Torontonians is different from the plights of people in Calgary, and the idea that we are all a fractured group of communities all coexisting really does foster the emotion that I really have to just look out for myself and my people and forget everybody else, when in fact we are all one people. Look at people who live up north. Look at our indigenous communities and the lack of goods and services that they receive. It's the design and infrastructure is lacking. And if we were to at least get past this idea of multiculturalism and building up separate, individual, equal cultures, we would have a more unified state, a more cohesive, I would say, a cohesive, what's the word I'm looking for? A cohesive endeavor, a cohesive natural endeavor, or natural endeavor for the state and the nation. The nation are the people, and the state is the governing body. Nonetheless, in Canada, we consider multiculturalism to be descriptive and prescriptive, both a sociological fact and a national ideology. However, it is also political, So multiculturalism is legislator, is political by its nature, and hence there is a policy of multiculturalism in Canada. And I will go on to highlight the hypocrisy of this legislator and how it's a detriment to Canadians. Of course, let me know what you think. Leave a comment, like, dislike. However you feel about this video, that's up to you. I hope that I truly convey my point concisely and coherently to you. If you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to ask. I don't mind. Debate in the comments all you want. Make a video about it. But before you do all that, just think about what we've been taught is multiculturalism and think about what benefit it has done for the Canadian identity and the Canadian citizen as a whole. There's actually an article by a lady, Sadia Ansari. I believe she's from, I think it was either Vancouver or Toronto, I can't remember. Maybe she's from either one or two of those cities. Because just by simply reading it, while we have different viewpoints, so we might be on a different political spectrum, the experiences are very similar and shared. This lovely lady came up with the conclusion that she came up with, and her political stance may be a bit different than mine, but the underlying issue remains the same. So, in Sadia Ansari's Here's How Multiculturalism Failed People Like Me, it highlights a complicated relationship of gratitude and apathy towards their own national identity as immigrants and people of color in Canada. So there isn't a blanket emotion that we all have, but definitely this complicated relationship of gratitude and apathy, the unwavering support for political groups, parties that haven't benefited anybody and that do not truly work to serve the people and only use the notion of multiculturalism and racial diversity and equality as a crux to get elected, a crux to get funding, and pandering to secure their foothold, their stronghold on the Canadian state, that really needs to be addressed. You see it, it's very evident in communities like my own that will continuously vote for people and haven't given a damn about them. And view them, I'm going to get into just exactly what the state views us as. And of course, we enjoy civil liberties like everybody else. We enjoy living in a first world country as immigrants, as people of color, right? As the settler community and those who've come here as non-white people, just being straight up. Because multiculturalism doesn't really take into, well, it takes into account white people vis-a-vis non-white people, and of course is not for the benefit of all people. It's a power structure essentially, but again, people of color, black people, immigrants, whatever, we all enjoy civil liberties here. We enjoy the federal institutions, we enjoy free healthcare, right? We pay our taxes, but we enjoy free healthcare. Nonetheless, it is still a complicated relationship due to lived and shared experiences of battling their position as the subaltern. Subaltern simply means that of a lower class, a perceived lower class, and individual indignities that are faced by new arrivals and non-white peoples alike. Even, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, I believe it was yesterday. Yesterday, we just had our new federal holiday, right? Our Truth and Reconciliation holiday, acknowledging the, well, the complete destruction of Native people, Indigenous people in Canada, the abhorrent and, what's the word I want to use here? I would say, just not, it's more than unfortunate the destructive nature of residential schools in stamping out indigenous culture. Everybody sees that. We can agree upon that. We have this holiday enacted. Nobody is sure how we're going to observe it, but definitely at least the voices are being heard, and this issue and plight is being brought to the forefront of Canadian society and not just swept under the rug. Nonetheless, the cultural differences that we all have are seen as a nuisance, a straight up nuisance, when contrasted with the settler community. Again, in short, multiculturalism traps people in differences and makes it the frame in which they base their identity. So, and this lady, not a PPC supporter, more of a left leaning political spectrum, but the same conclusion, which is something I have said before, it traps you in a box. You are no longer just Canadian. You are Black Canadian. You are Chinese Canadian. And you are now in a prescribed ideal, a prescribed sense of self. You no longer make yourself out to just be a Canadian, right? Accepted by all. This is your country. This is where you live, and it owes you something. No, you're seen now as the subaltern, as the other, and you're constantly going through subject self-making in order to appease, because you're seen as a nuisance. You're going to appease a construct that isn't designed to benefit you. That is what multiculturalism is here in Canada. Nonetheless, it ensures immigrants never truly shed their identity as the cultural other. It warps our perception of self. If you think about it, Black Canadians have been here since the 1600s. Right? We have specifically Chinese Canadians that built the railroads here. We had all sorts of Italian, Polish immigrants who came here before and post World War II. And yet we're all seen as little nuanced cultural others, some more than others, based upon skin tones and the recognizable differences, but nonetheless, none fully, truly taking on that Canadian identity and being accepted by the state. And that is really because we have a policy of multiculturalism. And thus, from a socio-political framework, multiculturalism is simply legislation built on the same colonial foundation which divides people based upon the notion of race and upholds domination over its indigenous population because they're not truly even acknowledged by multiculturalism, and non-white people. It's a racist policy, straight up. So that's it. Multiculturalism is a racist policy, plain and simple. No doubt about it. For people to really sit here and argue that multiculturalism is for the benefit of all Canadians, you're just drinking state Kool-Aid at this point. I know our grade 3 sociology teacher all taught us that multiculturalism is good, and like people from all over the world see the interconnectedness of various cultures and everybody living together and happy and peace and harmony. It's all a facade. It's not real. And this policy is a detriment to the Canadian identity because instead of being one solid people, we're a bunch of fractured enclaves, tribalistic mini states of people. You have people from Brampton who feel different than the people from Toronto, and not just because they live in two different cities, via perceived notions of ethnicities in their culture. How ethnic is this place versus how ethnic is that place, right? These enclaves that we had historically were built because the settler community, the Anglo-Saxon and Francophone British settlers that were here historically did not want other peoples of other backgrounds moving into the same neighborhoods of them. It's segregation. It's just that it, after policies and legislation against segregation was enacted, the same sort of, it still has the same underbelly of racism, but just painted over with multiculturalism. And therefore, you still have various enclaves of people all living separately and fostering the same notion that certain people live here, certain people live there, and that's what it is. When in fact, we should have a unified community, especially on a municipal level, of all peoples living together, sharing cultures, sharing ethnicities, sharing experiences, food, music, languages, and whatnot, but a perceived notion of Canadianness. They are all Canadian through and through, no doubt about it. So, as I've said, multiculturalism is bad, plain and simple. It does not foster the Canadian identity. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It is. It will be the. It will be the demise of Canadian. Wow, sorry. It will be the demise of Canadians unless we figure out a new, not only a new legislator to enact, but a new design and framework in which we nation make, like nation self make the nation, the ideal of what it means to be a Canadian, because it can't be multiculturalism, as it just doesn't foster a coherent society. And there's more. And there's more. So, when you really, really begin to bring the idea to light, you can see how multiculturalism is simply utilized by the Canadian state to uphold an air of superiority towards our southern neighbors, the US. So the state, Canada, it utilizes multiculturalism as a design, as a policy to convey its superior nature to its southern counterpart. And this is where you get phrases like true north. These ideas of true north harken back to our colonial days, our colonial empire days, in British imperialism. It conveys the dichotomy between northern states and southern states. The north is fair. The north is fair in reason and in skin complexion. Northern countries, at least post-Renaissance, were historic colonial empires. Northern countries retained technological superiority to many southern and eastern counterparts, and hence why you had the European colonial empires spread throughout the globe. And even the cool climate, the cool temperature, not these little sweaty Caribbean places where people are viewed as hot and lazy at the same time, hot-headed laziness, you know, brash. But you have cool climates and a cool temperament, true north. And while this notion has evolved over time to truly hearken on a perceived sense of Canadianness, and that is the foundation, which is fine, totally fine, but we should acknowledge it. It's fine if you want to use True North. I use True North because that's where I'm from. True North. I'm Canadian, and that is me taking root of something and saying, nope, that's not only yours. That belongs to me because I'm not Black Canadian. I am Canadian. I am Black, but I am Canadian. Ooh. See, some people are gonna feel that. Oh, he's black. He said he's black. He said he's not black. He said he's Canadian. Relax. You can all see my big old nose here. I am black, but I am Canadian. And this is something, especially for young people, whose parents were born here, they shouldn't be saying that, oh, you know, I'm from Korea. You're not from Korea. If your parents were born here, you're Canadian. End of discussion. You're not, you know what I mean? If you immigrated here and you pay taxes and you're a permanent resident, you have your citizenship, you are Canadian. Right? We owe it to you and you owe it to the country. You're a Canadian first. If you get, I often say, even when I was talking to my own lady who's from Kenya, I made a little joke. I said, if you ever get in trouble, say you're in another country, you need help, God forbid, who are you going to call? Are you going to call the Kenyan embassy or are you going to call the Canadian embassy? I'm sure, unless you're in Kenya, you're calling the Canadian embassy. And this is something I really need to get to people. Immigrants, settlers, white, black, Canadian, indigenous, we are all one people. And now more than ever is the time to start coming together and acting like it. But let me go on, because I don't want to just go off on a tangent. So as I mentioned before, we were talking about just how the true north harkens on old colonial Western ideas, Western imperial ideas nonetheless. How I said even the temperament of being cool, juxtaposed to its climate, vis-a-vis unruly, sweaty southern neighbors. It truly highlights how multiculturalism is merely a smokescreen used to hide the nature of the Canadian state. One founded on Anglo and Franco imperialism, on hegemony, on the destruction of peoples like the Cree, the Haudenosaunee, their societies, or at least the attempted subjugation of said societies, and the exploitation of undesirable peoples, the subaltern, the others, those that are not of those two groups. And thus, you know what? One beautiful example of this. But hold on, let me get some water. Let's get some juice. Okay, okay. All right. So, as I was saying, a beautiful example of how the Canadian state is full of it when it comes to multiculturalism, as how it's complete and utter foolishness, not meant to benefit us. A Something that highlights the hypocrisy of such a policy would be Canada's use of transnational agricultural labor forces, Canada's use of migrant farmers, to put in layman's terms. It truly shows. It's water. It's water. Nonetheless, Canada's use of migrant labor forces, transnational migrant labor forces, in particular from Mexico and Jamaica. But prior to that, it used to be Portuguese and Italian. And as you can see, those labor forces highlight which predominant immigrant groups are coming through the country. And in fact, I'm sure now even the face of those two groups has changed, as the face of many immigrants who come here, predominantly from Southeast Asia, whether sponsored or not, via this program or this framework, migrant workers, transnational migrant workers, highlights our own hypocrisy. But nonetheless, it conveys how socioeconomics play out in first world countries such as Canada with respects to not only capital flows, but micro and macro levels of migration, our political economy, and the subject self-making, vis-a-vis the correlation of class and race. So, all states, but today we're talking about Canada. So because this channel is going to be predominantly focused on Canada, but states and transnational corporations use cheap labor sources. In this example, originating from Mexico and Jamaica. These workers, they simply maneuver through the political economic programs such as SWAP. Google it, SWAP, which is pretty pictures as well. SWAP, which is designed to create the ideal migrant worker. It's not immigrant, migrant workers. This SWAP program, it's ideal to achieve maximum labor productivity and meeting the particular criterion of race, gender, and class. So most migrant workers tend to be male in this aspect. You could even contrast this to another state, which would be Dubai, in which many of their migrant workers are females, and many of the positions in which they hold would be those in the what's the word for it, like housework, and not only maids, because they do far more than that. And just think of the implicit biases that come to mind when you even express that notion. You'll see that conveyed simply through here. Nonetheless, these programs fuels our own migrant industrial complex and further cements the idea of the foreign migrant worker. These migrants, both of them, have to undergo self-making, so they have to create an image of themselves for the world to perceive to meet the requirements of a mentally and physically intense job imposed by host states such as Canada. Not everyone gets selected to work in the agricultural sector as a migrant worker, and there's a pervasiveness of Canada's racist multicultural system which comes into play with certain types of profiles of whom they prefer for this job. Stay hydrated, guys. Stay hydrated. Drink water. It's good for you. Remember, I used to drink so much water when I had to go to the gym, or when I went to the gym. You see, I say had because, as you could tell, I love going to the gym, pastime of mine. But things have changed. It's a new dawn, new era. Who knows? It's temporary apparently, but I may never step into a gym again. So, ask me why. Bet they take my money though. Bet that they take my money. Money's coming on my account. Nonetheless, an example of the hypocritical and racist multiculturalist system that we can utilize here with respect to migrant workers would be in well, the discussion of Mexican workers who, there's a particular word for it, campesinos. They're viewed as low income, simple people with dependence, limited education, and a lack of job prospects. And therefore, it is deemed by the state and these transnational corporations that they will work hard to provide for their families back home in Mexico and return at the end of their contract because they have families to go back to. And again, a different border, Canada and Mexico. It's a huge country between both, so it's not like the US. However, when you look at their Jamaican counterparts, they're more preferred based upon their physical and mental capacity to endure intensive labor. And just think about the implicit biases that come to play when you say these two, right? One of them is known for limited education and lacking job prospects, and work and looking back to a family to provide to, vis-a-vis Jamaican counterparts who are preferred for their physical and mental capacity to endure intensive labor and willingness to accept the absence of self-governance. They are meant to be obedient and unlikely to conduct unsavory activities, criminal activities. And the issue with this, well, there's several issues with this. For sure, the major issue is that transnational corporations and socio-political programs such as SWAP in the Canadian state acknowledge this and look for this, and these things are preferred. These perceived characteristics and factors are preferred with respect to hiring migrant workers. But the other issue is that the applicants know this too. They're not they're not simple people. They're just regular human beings from different countries that are looking for an opportunity to work in a globalized world with interconnected economies. People need money. You gotta work. Is what it is. But the applicants know this because they're not stupid, because they don't just fall into their implicit bias. But people need money, so in order to land the job, they attempt to appear as that prototypical worker. So that's what the self-making comes into play. They'll withhold their education. What else? There's another thing I do. Yeah, so they'll withhold education because intelligent and well-educated migrants are not preferred by these transnational corporations because you can't control people who know things, of course, right? And they'll be less desperate. And however, they will, if these people are educated, but they make themselves appear as not educated. But anyways, in short, Canadian state, through its transnational corporations, because they're the ones assigning them contracts for these agricultural sectors, subjects migrant workers to a model of employment that's reminiscent of indentured servitude based upon the favoritism towards perceived and actually, well, not perceived, implicit biases that they have on perceived peoples. And of course, it's reminiscent, eerily reminiscent of Canada's colonial past. And that's one of the issues I'm sure many people have, whether you're left wing or right wing. Predominantly, though, if you're right wing, because as a conservative, and many right wing people, we acknowledge what it is. We don't constantly try to create a construct, a fallacious construct of ideals and feel goods and identity politics and just straight foolishness. We know the world's a grimy pace. It is what it is, and it's our job to fix it. It's our job to better ourselves. Our job to preserve our values while constantly seeking to be progressive, not just in words and ideas, but by nature itself. And as Canadians, we exaggerate this idea that we hold this moral high ground simply due to multiculturalism. It's if you look at migrant workers and the hardships in which they endure and just how they are perceived by not only corporations acting on behalf of the Canadian state to fuel particular sectors. The idea of multiculturalism in itself is fallacious, right? It's fractured, and the belief that we hold human rights universally is simply untrue. We do not. It's by simply diminishing the rights of a few, of some rather, not just a few, we highlight our own hypocrisy as a state. And if you really consider even our nation's past military involvements from World War One, stormtroopers, World War Two, and our modern involvement with respect to the Afghanistan war, we staked a claim, especially in the Afghanistan war, as a humanitarian effort, yet we treat people inhumanely here in our very country. Look at the treatment of migrant workers, and now, currently, presently, you can see how we treat our own citizens who uphold their own sovereignty and freedom of thought. So sovereignty, freedom of thought against you know what. And and our encroachment of civil liberties and the encroachment of rights due to that which shall not be named on this platform because I don't want to be censored right now. Need the video to get out. But you know exactly what I'm talking about. If Canada's going to sit here and say that, oh, we're this utopian northern country, amazing place to be where everybody's welcome, you know, and yet we, not only that, but we are the ones who love to say, well, look what Canadians does for people overseas. Look what Canada has done. Look what our service members have done. You know, the humanitarian efforts that we've had overseas, and yet at the same time, not take care of our veterans, put people in boxes of class and race, treat migrant workers unfairly, treat them like the bottom of my heel. And now we treat citizens, well, we not only segregate citizens, but we treat them second class if they do not adhere to our ideals, our notions, our mandates. Is Canada as fair and just and rose-colored as it is, as it tries to come off to be? Are these things true? Is it real? Right? That's the real thing. Is it real? Is multiculturalism a benefit? Is it a real benefit, or is it just a construct, a design meant to uphold the Canadian state and its ideals, and not truly benefit and serve the people? That was one of my main issues during my campaign, to show people that we are not this and not that, and not fall for the identity politics and the tricks and the pandering, but show people that we are all one. You know, we're all Canadian, and that we have to work together to uphold the rights and freedoms of all Canadians and ensure that everybody has equity and equality of life that they deserve here. A lot of people got tied up on the color of their skin and getting some benefits. But c'est la vie. C'est la vie. There's always next time. There's always next time. And nonetheless, multiculturalism is nothing more than a design. So remember that. Multiculturalism is nothing more than a design that applies to some, but not all. It categorizes people into non-Canadians. So multiculturalism creates non-Canadians. When I say I am from blank and is not from Canada, I'm automatically making myself out to be the other. And this ensures the same colonial hierarchy. It's very pervasive, and I'd say it's, what's the word that I'm looking for? Because it is pervasive, but not only that, it's well, I would say it's almost like a Nancy, but nobody knows what that is. But it tricks you. It tricks you into believing that something is good when it truly isn't, in layman's terms. Multiculturalism is the state's attempt to suffice the growing need of consumer capitalism and not an absolute policy of benevolence, prosperity, and the acceptance of all people. And thus, the Canadian identity needs to be universal for all, settler and indigenous, non-white, people of color, white. It needs to be a universal concept. So everybody needs to feel Canadian. We all deserve the right with respect to an aggregate community on this country, in this land, a true nation that supports each other and values each other. Second and third generation people, as I mentioned, should not say that they're from, you know, this country or that country, or this ethnicity or that ethnicity. They should simply say, I'm from this city, I'm from this province, I'm from this region, I'm from this community. This is where I'm from. When you ask them where you're from, that should be our lexicon. So when somebody says to you, where are you from? You should say, I'm from Oakville. Or you should say, I'm from Vancouver. You know what I mean? You should just go on to say, you know, I'm from Jamaica. Like, I was born here in If people say everybody's gonna have to sort of relearn this and reprogram themselves, especially with respect to our lexicon. When somebody asks you where you're from, tell them what city you're from. If you're paying taxes and you're living here, you're paying rent, you're buying food here, contributing to the society, you're working a job, you're not working a job, but you live in Canada and you're from this country, if you're not on vacation, you're Canadian. And that's simply it. We all need to feel at home, and multiculturalism doesn't do that. Every Canadian has the right to feel like this country belongs to them. And thus I am saying that multiculturalism is fractured, it's disjunctive, divisive, and it needs to go. It disparages certain groups and upholds our old colonial imperialist past. We need a new, we don't need a new Canadian identity. We need the Canadian identity to be universal for all Canadians. And that's that. We'll have a strong and free nation from that. If everybody is on one accord and everybody is unified, no one will be able to mess with Canada as a state. If we all back each other and we all support each other and we're willing to work together and build a true country and not segregate society and not classify people via race and ethnicity and where they're from or where their grandmother's from, we'll have a better true northern country. And take that word, true north, Canada first, because that applies to you. When people say true north, you should feel something because this is your country. When people say Canada first, you should feel as though you're being put first because that applies to you. And it's for that reason, I'm sure many people are wondering, that reason in which why I personally, long before the political party of the People's Party of Canada even came to existence, that I was concerned with our ideas of what it means to be Canadian, the Canadian identity. And based upon this issue of multiculturalism, and when you really look into the People's Party of Canada's platform with respect to the Canadian identity, I believe, and I'll make it my duty to bring that platform to the forefront and truly ensure that we as a whole adopt this oneness, this sense of oneness in community, and not just fractured enclaves in different cultures. And that's that. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, like the video, dislike the video, but undoubtedly think about what it really means to be Canadian and think about how the Canadian identity applies to you and truly have some introspection because I know a lot of people when they hear that multiculturalism is bad, they automatically think racism. That's not the case. Let us be a bit more progressive. Let us use, some logic, thought, and reasoning in how we could better our country because we all have a duty here to uphold the country, the state, and the nation. We all have to work together. And multiculturalism will not foster this sense of community and growth that we need. And nonetheless, my name again, Raatib Anderson. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be doing another video very soon. Until then, take care. Peace.